Hi folks, you're Tacitus today, your pushback channel, and thank you for joining this audio live stream. In this essay, I'd like to talk about concepts of merit and to some extent how they've changed or how they've been viewed over the ages. Now, I guess the definition of merit or how it was perceived was, let's say in the early medieval time, it would have been the knight in shining armor and so on, rescuing the damsel in distress. This sort of changed over time to mean people who were good citizens and they worked hard and they saved their money. They acted in the interests of the common good. They didn't want to impose themselves on others and so on. Or merit was someone who came, first in the senior high school, or someone who was captain of the football team. So merit came. Merit sort of had various sort of aspects, and meritorious in sport or meritorious in personal conduct. Meritorious in being frugal in one's habits and so on. But generally, it was perceived as you had to achieve something that had some benefit and did not result in the retardation of another in any direct way. Now, of course, this has changed now, where if you break the law and lie across public highways in the name of climate change, then that's considered a meritorious good. But hold on, you say, well, that can't be right because you're breaking the law. Well, no, you see, because the laws are made by fascist fucking Nazi fucking Hitlers. So we're entitled to do that. It is our duty to flout those laws, because in flouting those laws, we are fighting back against Hitler. So merit's sort of taken on some different turns, but merit, certainly as I would understand it, is by accepting responsibility for one's own actions, of course, but by achieving things in your own right, and producing or creating useful things in your own right. Now, the useful things can be maybe you build something, or you have well brought up, well adjusted children, or you have you find the cure for cancer or something like that. You're doing something of merit, and you're doing it in your own right. So now, a useful example of looking at a society that went from sort of very limited merit to being very pronounced promotions and rewards were very much based on merit, to being a much lesser meritorious society afterwards, was the French period during pre-sort of revolution, then the French Revolution, particularly in the Napoleonic era, and then the post-Napoleonic era, because they involved no merit, lots of merit, no merit, or much reduced merit coming along. Now, there are various writers such as Stendahl, and indeed he was a French guy, but he took on that German name. That novel, The Black and the Red, there was Flaubert, and there are other writers. And the French were never really able to reconcile this idea following the Napoleonic period of how to maintain the aristocratic pretensions and a merit-based system together. They never were able to fully reconcile that, whether it be a political level or an economic level. It always seemed to be a confused, so even to today, to a large extent, it seemed to be a confused situation there. Now, we look at, say, Britain during the Britain during the Industrial Revolution, where merit became very much a part of the fabric of British economic and social society there. But today that's largely been lost. I mean, if you're a black lesbian, then you're entitled to be a doctor, whereas if you're straight white male, you damn fascist Nazi. You were supposed to keep you down because you're Hitler. So merit has been caught up in economic situations. it's being caught up in political situations or social political situations, and or being consumed by ideology. And we see today that merit, of course, is completely consumed by ideology, which is of course guaranteeing its downfall. Now, coming back to Franz, though, and if you're able to read those novels, you'll see, say in the case of The Black and the Red, there's, Julian's a bright, gifted kid, but he's got the crass manners of a country boy, if you like, and is viewed by the people in the city as being really. This is after the aristocracy's been reappointed following the end of the Napoleonic era, and where merit is viewed as something quite vulgar, and where those who want to sort of rise in society, whether through wealth or other means, by merit, seen now as being quite vulgar. Now, the Napoleonic era was interesting. Napoleon came from a he's Corsican. He came from a sort of a regional, if you like, area of France, and very minor nobility. He was sufficiently noble to get himself into the officers' artillery school. That was a relatively new area of warfare. The idea of massed cannons, and there'd been a lot of changes in technology in the casting of cannons and how to move them around and this sort of thing, which did change where the role that cannons or artillery generally were to play in military confrontations further on. At the time, sort of, being a general because your parents weren't, in the nobility, or as a dashing cavalry officer, these sorts of things. These are the ones. Now, cavalry attracted the wealthier because you had to supply your own horse, and supplying a good quality horse and having it fed and having a flashy uniform. These were quite expensive. So that tended to attract the nobility. Now, when the French Revolution occurred, it swept away the nobility, and into that vacuum came men of ability, and Napoleon Bonaparte was an example of that. And because Napoleon was a regional guy and had really earned his way into the position that certainly as a brigadier general, and later on, of course, as Emperor of France, or first consul before that, then he was able to, because he'd risen as he would see it, primarily, which is true, on his own merits, and he was one of the most brilliant military tacticians and strategists of all time, particularly a tactician, less so a strategist, but he was if you looked at the top 10 generals of all time, I'd be surprised if he wasn't number one or number two. So someone of that outstanding ability who rose to the top. Now, Napoleon selected people based on ability, so he didn't care who your parents were, or who your who your friends were, or something like that, or whether you were born into a certain social class. He cared about ability, or primarily. I mean, if you were that vulgar and crass, then that wouldn't work. But generally, he looked at ability, and so men of ability were able to rise, not only in the military, where of course that was a big part of Napoleon's thing, but also into the public services. Now, if you look at the ability of say someone like Talleyrand. Now, he was the foreign minister, in effect, Secretary of State, I suppose you'd call it, but he was. He was someone of outstanding ability. Now, he was a regional guy, and he had a club foot, and he had a number of handicaps that you think would have held him back. But he, in fact, was really the premier foreign affairs representative of France for 30 years. Through the pre-revolutionary administrations, the Napoleonic administration, into the return of the aristocracy, then the return of Napoleon, and then the return of the aristocracy again. So Talleyrand was someone of exceptional ability, and recognised as so by all the heavyweights of the time, like Count Metternich and so on. So Talleyrand, and indeed others, rose by ability to hold very senior positions all across the public service, finances, organisation, and all sorts of areas that hitherto had been strictly reserved for aristocrats. Some of whom were lazy, useless nincompoops. They were just there because of their class or the influence maybe of their family and so on. So there was very much a merit-based society. And when you look at how the French were able to prosecute those wars for that long against such an array of adversaries, I mean, they were up against at least three nations at any one time, and Napoleon and the organisation, the military organisation. And if you look at just the military organisation, how they were able to feed armies of that size along with forced marches, so they could have, and this was exceptional really at the time, they were able to bake fresh bread every morning to feed the soldiers. And this is a forced march. This is where they're marching 20, 30, 40 kilometres a day. And yet they're able to have the entire logistical machine, running alongside them, including baking fresh bread for the soldiers, fresh hot bread for the soldiers every morning. So this was a step forward in military organisation, logistics, and marshalling the resources of a nation. No one had really seen this sort of tight, I mean, it's had its shortcomings, of course, but no one had seen this level of tight organisation and this ability to focus resources where they were needed at any given time. And now a lot of this depended on Napoleon's military genius, but his military genius aside, he had a huge logistical machine that made sure the munitions were there, the food was there, and the other resources, fodder for the horses and so on. And this worked, whether it worked like clockwork or not, you could argue, but it worked more effectively than pretty much any of the other logistical machines around, which meant on a relative basis it was far superior. And this again counted for the constant victories the French were able to bring about, or Napoleon was, and the continued ability to produce these victories even under what would be considered difficult circumstances. And you're looking at Napoleon, the way he'd set off an army of, and he's got three opposing armies that he's got to face, and he systematically goes around defeating each one in turn with some precision. Now, you need a lot of very capable people to do that, and none of the other combatants had that level of capability. And the difference was, of course, at least in my view, that Napoleon promoted and appointed based on merit. And this was a key element of it. Now, if we look at, say, after Napoleon was gone, so post 1815, and there was a lot of, drama and disaster to sort of repair following that. France was, again, largely bankrupt given all the money that had been thrown at the military campaigns. But the aristocratic social scene came back in France. People were appointed, again, because they were aristocrats or they had long family traditions and the like. And the sort of aristocratic manners and behaviours that had been around in pre-revolutionary France began to return. Maybe not as pronounced as they had been previously, but there were still men of capability and merit who'd been led to believe that if you worked hard and if you did well at school, you did this and you did the right things and so on, that you would do all right, and there would be opportunities for you. And this rude awakening as the aristocrats came back into town, how there were in fact far fewer opportunities for self-made, capable men to rise in society or have a successful business or anything like that. You were still a regional hick, and would be seen so by these aristocrats purely on the basis of manners and social etiquette and graces alone. That would relegate you in status. So now France went through a period of so it was argued where men of merit had nowhere to go, and I think the novel, The Black and the Red, or The Red and the Black, I think it is, that I think illustrates that through that character that Stendahl creates of, I think it's Julian Sorel, I think it's his name. So So it's worth looking at merit and how it's transformed through the ages, because in the West now we've lost the merit thing. The idea is that how many black lesbians do we have as doctors and surgeons? Oh, we don't have enough. Well, let's just get rid of capable straight white guys and put incompetent black lesbians in there. Job done. We've got equity now. So this drive to equity, which is driven along purely ideological lines, and is attractive to the globalists because it crushes the white society, the merit-based white society that would get in the way of the globalist project. So they're quite happy that white people are sidelined like this. It just makes the globalist project easier to put in place. But we need to look at the wider cost of loss of merit. Once merit is in place, and merit is the basis for determining most things, then we're far more likely to have a rich and prosperous and fairer society than in any other system. So once we let merit go, then we're in the wider conversation of getting rid of merit. Then we're saying, well, laws don't really need to be codified clearly, because we need the wiggle room to be able to arbitrarily apply ideology wherever we want to. So laws don't have to be codified. Well, once laws don't have to be codified, then legal decisions and contracts, all agreements, all legal agreements, therefore also become ideological by extension. All interpretations become ideological, not merit-based. And all outcomes have to be ideological, not merit-based. We need to look at the wider damage a deviation from merit. Now, merit allows the hardest working or the brightest people to rise to the top. But it's much better to have those people at the top because they've earned their way there, and they're far more likely to have a greater degree of forbearance for their fellow citizens. Whereas people that achieve these high office through purely ideological reasons, they're likely to be still filled with anger and vengeance and bitterness, given that they have not earned their way there. And so the type of people who end up at the top are very different in a merit-based system. So merit-based, even though it creates winners and losers, it creates a much fairer society in the longer run, rather than ideological, which will tend to punish those. You don't agree with me, I will kill you. And whereas in a merit-based society, you're offered the opportunity of saying, well, if you behave this way and work hard, you'll be okay. You're offered the opportunity to participate. Maybe not in terms that your ideological fanaticism agrees with, but you're given that opportunity. Whereas in an ideological society, you don't agree with me, I will kill you. And so they're very different societies. You've been a tacitus about your pushback channel. Thank you for listening.